All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to connect two dots that might seem miles apart, a simple economic question and what might be one of the biggest security challenges of our time.
So let's rewind to the 1990s. The world was facing this massive problem, right? How do we get clean, reliable water to millions of people in developing countries? And then, this one big idea started to take hold, an idea that promised to fix everything.
And that big idea? Privatization. The thinking went something like this. Private companies, they're driven by profit, they're all about efficiency. Surely they could do a way better job than these clunky, often underfunded state-run utilities. That was a sales pitch anyway.
But was it really the silver bullet everyone was hoping for? Was private control the magic answer to finally turning on the taps for good? Well, let's dig in and see what the data actually tells us about this huge global experiment.
So how do we know? Well, the World Bank actually did a major study. They looked at state-run versus private water utilities all across Africa and basically put them head-to-head on a bunch of different metrics to see who was really getting the job done.
And at first glance, the case for privatization looked really solid. The numbers showed that private companies had higher labor productivity and less of their money was going to labor costs. On paper, they looked like these lean, mean, efficient machines.
But, and this is a huge but, that efficiency came with a pretty hefty price tag for the average person. This study found that the cost of water, what people actually had to pay, shot up by an average of 82%. I mean, wow, 82%.
So, you're probably thinking, okay, for an 82% price hike, the service must have been way better, right? Wrong. It was basically a tie. The quality of service barely budged. Both systems served about the same number of people. And get this, the public utilities actually provided water for an hour longer each day, on average. So much for that premium service.
So at the end of the day, the World Bank's own report basically said the whole experiment didn't really work. Privatization just wasn't the magic fix everyone thought it would be. But here's where the story takes a really sharp turn. Because while all this was going on, this whole debate about pipes and profits, a much, much bigger force was building in the background.
Yeah, this is where we have to zoom out, way out. We're leaving the world of economic reports behind and stepping into something much bigger. A conversation about global security.
See, scientists now say we've entered a brand new geological age. They call it the Anthropocene, and that's just a fancy way of saying that for the first time in the history of the planet, we are the dominant force of change. Human activity is what's shaping the Earth now.
And the pace of this change, it's just staggering. I mean, think about it. In just 30 years, roughly the same time that whole water privatization debate was happening, the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere jumped by 45%. And that is putting a kind of pressure on our most essential resources, like water, that we've just never seen before.
And this changes the entire conversation. We're not just talking about the environment anymore. The U.S. intelligence community saw this coming over a decade ago. They said, look, climate change is going to be a threat multiplier. It takes existing problems like weak governments and just pours gasoline on the fire, pushing fragile places right to the brink of collapse.
And this isn't just some theory, some what-if scenario. The link between a changing climate and total social breakdown, well, unfortunately, we've already seen it happen, and the results are absolutely devastating.
Let's just look at Syria for a minute. It all started with a historic drought that went on for years. That led to massive crop failures. So what happens? About 1.5 million people, farmers, herders, are forced to leave their land and flood into the cities. The cities just couldn't handle it. You get overcrowding, no jobs, rising crime. It created this perfect, explosive powder keg that helped ignite one of the most brutal civil wars of our time.
What happened in Syria? It's a pattern that's not new at all. Historians have looked back through time and they've found these 5 key ingredients that show up in almost every major collapse of a civilization. And you'll notice, right there at the end of the list, climate change. It's always there, kind of acting like the engine that drives all the other problems.
And we see this pattern repeat itself over and over throughout history. You have the Mayan civilization, which collapsed after a terrible drought. Centuries later, the huge Ottoman Empire was nearly brought to its knees by a sudden climate shift called the Little Ice Age. The lesson from history is crystal clear. When the climate changes faster than a civilization can adapt, things can fall apart fast.
So this brings us to a really fundamental question. What does security even mean anymore? How do you define national security when the planet itself, the very environment we depend on, is becoming a direct threat?
And let's be clear, this isn't some problem for other people in faraway places. This is right here, right now.
The Pentagon itself put out a report identifying 79 of its own critical military bases that are already at risk. We're talking flooding, drought, wildfires, all threatening the home bases of the most powerful military on Earth today.
This really forces us to redefine what war even is. In the past, we thought of wars as being fought over things like geopolitics or ideology. You could call them wars of choice. But in this new era, the Anthropocene, the drivers are changing. Conflicts are going to be about the absolute basics: water, food, a stable place to live. These aren't wars of choice. They're wars of existence.
And that right there is probably the most dangerous shift of all. Because when people are faced with the very real possibility of their children going hungry or thirsty, all the old rules go out the window. War stops being a political chess game and it becomes something much more primal, a desperate fight for survival.
So that brings us all the way back to the beginning, that debate over a water pipe in Africa and the risk of a war over a drying river. They seem like they're worlds apart, don't they? But are they? Or are they really just two different points on the exact same timeline? The small fights we have today over who controls a resource, they're just a preview of the massive conflicts for survival that are on the horizon. Which really makes you wonder, aren't we even focusing on the right battles?